N'Golo Kanté woke up early that morning. The sky was clear, and the sun shone gently against the window of his apartment in London. It was a day off, with no training or commitments with Chelsea, and he decided to take the opportunity to take care of some personal errands. Among them, paying off accumulated bills from the previous month. Despite his fortune and fame, Kanté always preferred to do things on his own, without assistance or intermediaries. There was something comforting about the simplicity of everyday life, the direct contact with people, and the sense of accomplishment in handling small details of his routine. He put on a simple polo shirt, a pair of jeans, and his slightly worn sneakers, comfortable and ready for any walk. He grabbed a backpack where he kept the bills, checked to make sure he had his wallet and phone, and left. On the way to the bank, a few people recognized him. One or two fans waved, and he responded with his usual shy smile. It was always like this. Kanté never had to make an effort to be liked. His humility and kindness were natural, and people could feel it. When he arrived at the bank, he noticed the place was busy. The main hall was full of customers waiting to be served. Some people were standing, others sitting on blue plastic chairs in the waiting area. Kanté walked calmly to the end of the line and took his place, unhurried. Even though he was a global football star, he would never think of asking for priority or any special treatment. He wasn't that kind of person. The line moved slowly. From time to time, the player looked ahead, observing the tellers behind the counter. There were 3 open stations, and the service seemed slow. Still, he remained patient as he did on the field, waiting for the right moment to act. He took one of the bills from his backpack and checked the amounts, distracting himself with the numbers. That's when a woman behind him in line started complaining loudly. "This is ridiculous," she said, crossing her arms. "Every time I come here, the bank is packed, and there's always someone who takes forever at the counter." Kanté heard the outburst but didn't react. He didn't imagine it had anything to do with him. "Look at this," she continued, pointing directly at the stack of bills in his hands. "How many bills are you paying, huh? Are you going to stay at the counter all day?" This time, Kanté realized the comment was directed at him. He turned slightly and looked at the woman with a calm but surprised expression. "Sorry, madam," he said in his soft voice with a French accent. "I just need to pay a few bills." "A few? You're holding a whole pile. Some of us have things to do, you know?" The woman huffed, visibly irritated. People around them started paying attention. Some exchanged uncomfortable glances, while others seemed curious to see how this would unfold. Kanté, still keeping his patience, tried to respond kindly. "I'm waiting in line just like everyone else. I don't want to inconvenience anyone." But the woman wasn't interested in a peaceful conversation. She took a step forward, getting closer to the player, and raised her voice. "Do you think that just because you're famous, you can take up everyone's time? This isn't your VIP lounge, you know?" The atmosphere grew tense. Some people whispered, recognizing Kanté and wondering why anyone would be arguing with one of the most humble footballers. Others just watched in silence, uncomfortable with the woman's aggressive tone. Kanté, however, didn't change his stance. He disliked arguments and always tried to avoid conflicts whenever possible. "I don't think that at all, madam. I'm just here to pay my bills, like anyone else." "Then hurry up. I don't have all day." The woman seemed increasingly agitated, gesturing and speaking loud enough for the entire bank to hear. A security guard, a tall man in a dark suit, started walking toward them, noticing that the situation could get out of control. Before he arrived, however, something unexpected happened. The woman, completely out of control, leaned forward and spat in Kanté's face. Time seemed to freeze. Silence took over the room. Some people gasped in shock, while others covered their mouths, unable to believe what they had just seen. Kanté himself stood still for a moment, his eyes wide. The spit slowly dripped down his cheek. That was enough for the security guard to act. He firmly grabbed the woman by the arm, but without aggression. "Ma'am, you need to leave," he said, leaving no room for argument. "Let go of me!" she screamed, trying to break free. "I'm telling the truth." The security guard began escorting her out of the bank as she kept muttering angrily. Some people in the line shook their heads in disapproval, while others avoided looking at her as she was removed. Kanté, still standing there, took a deep breath and wiped his face with the back of his hand. He didn't say anything, just watched as the woman was taken away. The tension still lingered in the air, but slowly, the murmurs resumed, and the bank's routine returned to normal. He sighed and looked ahead. There were still a few people before his turn at the counter, so without making a fuss, he went back to waiting. The atmosphere inside the bank was still tense after the incident. Some people whispered among themselves, casting furtive glances at Kanté, who tried to ignore the unwanted attention. He wiped his face again with a tissue that one of the bank employees, visibly embarrassed by what had happened, offered him. Kanté accepted it with a slight nod, thanking him in a low voice. The line moved slowly. Now, some people looked at him with sympathy, perhaps even admiration for not reacting aggressively to the woman who had insulted him. Others still seemed surprised, as if they expected him to do something more, maybe confront her, maybe leave the bank in outrage. But he simply remained there, as he always did, handling life's situations with quiet patience. When he finally reached the counter, he was greeted by a middle-aged teller, a bald man with a serious expression who clearly felt uncomfortable about what had just happened. "Mr. Kanté, I'm very sorry about what happened." Kanté gave a slight smile and waved his hand dismissively, as if to ease the awkwardness. "Don't worry, it wasn't your fault." The teller nodded, but still seemed uneasy. "How can I help you today?" Kanté placed his backpack on the counter and began taking out the bills one by one. "I'd like to pay these, please." The teller took the papers and began typing the barcode numbers into the system. Meanwhile, one of the bank managers, a tall man in a well-tailored suit, approached with a professional smile. "Mr. Kanté, it's an honor to have you here. If you'd like, we can take care of this more quickly in a private room." Kanté looked up and politely declined with a small gesture. "Thank you, but I'm fine here. I just want to finish this and leave." The manager nodded, though he seemed slightly disappointed that he couldn't offer the football star special treatment. After all, it was rare for a player of his stature to insist on following the same process as any other customer. As the teller continued processing the payments, 2 police officers entered the bank. Both wore dark blue uniforms and had serious expressions. As soon as they spotted Kanté, they walked directly toward him. The player raised his eyebrows, surprised. "Mr. Kanté?" one of the officers asked. "Yes?" "We need you to come with us to the police station." A murmur spread through the bank again. People exchanged shocked glances. Some were already pulling out their phones, probably thinking about recording the scene. The teller, still holding Kanté's bills, went pale. "Police station?" Kanté asked, frowning. "What's going on?" The officer glanced at his colleague, who then answered, "A complaint has been filed against you. The woman who was removed from the bank has reported that she was verbally and physically assaulted." Kanté blinked a few times, processing the information. He, who hadn't even raised his voice, was now being accused of assault. This must be a mistake. I never touched her. I didn't even yell. "We understand, sir," the first officer said, maintaining a neutral tone. "But we need you to come with us for questioning." The bank manager, who was still nearby, stepped in. "I saw everything. There are security cameras in the bank that show exactly what happened." "That's good," the second officer replied. "We'll request the footage, but for now, we need to follow procedure and take Mr. Kanté to the station." Kanté took a deep breath. He didn't like trouble and didn't want to be in this situation, but he knew there was no point in resisting. If there was a formal complaint, the best thing to do was to clear things up as soon as possible. "Okay, I'll go with you." The bank teller, still holding the bills, hesitated before asking, "But what about your payments?" Kanté looked at him and smiled slightly. "Can you finish processing them? I'll come back later for the receipts." The teller nodded, still a bit stunned. As Kanté turned to follow the officers, he noticed that some people in line were looking at him with expressions of indignation, not toward him, but at the absurdity of the situation he was caught in. Others just seemed shocked. The officers escorted him to the exit, where a small group of onlookers had already gathered outside. He calmly got into the police car, without handcuffs or any resistance. As the door closed, the whispers outside grew louder. The patrol car drove toward the station, while Kanté, looking out the window, wondered how something as simple as paying bills had turned into this. The police car drove through the streets of London at a steady pace. N'Golo Kanté watched the city pass by through the window, his expression calm, but his eyes reflecting a hint of disbelief. He had never been involved in any kind of trouble, let alone taken to a police station. His life had always been marked by discretion, respect, and simplicity. And now here he was, sitting in the back of a police car, falsely accused of something he hadn't done. The officers accompanying him didn't seem hostile. In fact, they looked somewhat uncomfortable with the situation. One of them glanced sideways at Kanté, as if wanting to say something, but remained silent. Kanté didn't try to start a conversation either. He just waited for the moment when he could clarify everything and put this surreal episode behind him. When they arrived at the station, they were met by an older officer with graying hair and an analytical gaze. He recognized Kanté immediately, but maintained a formal demeanor. Mr. Kanté, thank you for cooperating. We just need to take your statement and review the bank's security footage. This should be resolved quickly. Kanté nodded. That's fine. I just want to clear this up as soon as possible. He was taken to a simple interrogation room, where a clerk waited with a notepad. Kanté sat at the table while the graying officer stood nearby. Can you tell us what happened at the bank? The officer asked in a professional but not aggressive tone. Kanté took a deep breath and recounted everything, from the moment he arrived at the bank to the instant the woman spat in his face. He emphasized that he had never raised his voice or laid a hand on her. The clerk took careful notes. When he finished, the officer crossed his arms. There were several witnesses at the bank, as well as the security footage. We'll review everything. If your version is confirmed, you'll be free to go immediately. Kanté simply nodded. He knew he had nothing to worry about, but it was still uncomfortable to be there, having to defend himself against a false accusation. The verification process took about an hour. During that time, he remained in the room, without access to his phone or any updates from the outside. At one point, a young officer entered with a cup of water and handed it to him. I'm a big fan of yours, man, the officer said quietly, before quickly leaving. Kanté smiled faintly and thanked him. Finally, the graying officer returned to the room with a neutral expression. Mr. Kanté, as we suspected, the footage confirms your account. The woman who filed the complaint has a history of aggressive behavior and has been brought in for further questioning. You're free to go. Kanté let out a small sigh of relief and stood up. Thank you. I apologize for the inconvenience, the officer added. Unfortunately, we have to follow protocol whenever a formal complaint is made. I understand, Kanté replied without resentment. He was escorted to the station's reception area, where his phone was finally returned to him. As soon as he turned it on, he was bombarded with notifications. Messages from friends, journalists trying to contact him, social media mentions. The incident had already spread. When he stepped outside, he saw a small group of reporters and onlookers gathered. As soon as they spotted him, they began firing questions and taking photos. Kanté, what happened at the station? Do you plan to press charges against the woman who accused you? How does it feel to be the victim of a false allegation? Kanté raised his hand in a calm gesture, signaling that he wouldn't be giving interviews. A taxi was parked at the corner, and he quickly got into the car before the situation escalated further. Where to, sir? Asked the driver, a bearded man who clearly recognized him but didn't make a big deal out of it. Back to the bank, please. I need to pick up my payment receipts. The driver chuckled lightly. Of course, sir. On the way, Kanté looked out the window, reflecting on the strange day he had. Even as a peaceful and discreet person, he had been caught up in an absurd conflict simply for waiting patiently in line. It made him think about how many people faced injustices daily without the luck of having cameras or witnesses to prove their innocence. When he arrived at the bank, he saw that some people were still there, and the manager was waiting for him outside. "Mr. Kanté, we deeply regret the trouble caused. Here are your receipts." He took the papers and smiled slightly. "Thank you." Before he left, one of the customers from earlier approached and extended his hand. "You were very patient back there. I don't think I could have stayed that calm." Kanté shook the man's hand and simply said, "Life already has enough problems. It's not worth creating new ones." And with that, he tucked the receipts into his pocket and went on with his day.